Hey bookworms. So if you clicked on this video, then you're already prepared because it's a disturbing story, but it's one of my favorites out of this book. So Chuck Palahniuk is the guy that wrote Fight Club. And if you've seen it, then you know he's kind of weird. But if you've read his stories, if you've read his books, if you've ever even heard him talk to people like in an interview on a podcast or whatever, you know that he's kind of crazy. No, I love him. He's twisted. And the story that I'm going to read to you to hopefully help you fall asleep will be very disturbing. It's like my favorite out of this whole book. I've read a few of them. I think the end, I haven't read like some of the end, like last stories, but I've read a lot of them. And this one is going to be really dark, but really good. So if you want to fall asleep to something creepy, stay tuned. So the story that I'm going to read to you comes from this book called Make Something Up, Stories You Can't Unread by Chuck Palahniuk. Let's go to Phoenix, and I'm going to just get started. On Monday night, Rachel calls long distance from a motel in Orlando. Listening to the phone ring on the other end of the line, she picks up the remote control and clicks through television stations with the sound muted. She counts 15 rings. 16. Ted answers on the 26th ring, out of breath, and she asks him to pass the receiver to their daughter. I'll go get her, but I can't promise any miracles. There's a clunk as he sets the phone on the kitchen counter, and over the line, Rachel can hear his voice get louder and fainter as he moves around the house shouting, "April, honey, come talk to mommy." She hears the squeak of the spring on the screen door. Ted's footsteps appear and disappear as he moves from the wooden floor of the hallway to the carpeted stairs. Rachel waits. She sits on the bed. Rachel waits. She sits on the bed. The motel room's rug and drapes smell vaguely like a vintage clothing store. A lot of mildewed fabric, a little stale sweat, and cigarette smoke. It's rare that she has to travel with her job. This is the first trip since April was born 3 years ago. She clicks through silent football games, music videos without music. The house where they live now isn't their first. Where they lived before, it had burned down to the ground, but the fire was nobody's fault. That much has been proven in a court of law. It was a fabulous freak accident. They lost everything they owned, and then their daughter had been born blind. April was blind, but things could have turned out worse. That first house had been Ted's before they even met. Glass block had filled a wall of the dining room, casting a grid like a net over the black lacquered table and chairs. When you flipped a switch, gas flames danced magically on a bed of crushed granite in the living room fireplace. The bathtubs, toilets, and sinks were black porcelain. Vertical blinds dangled in the windows. Nothing was earth-toned or wood-grained. But it suited Ted. The house had. He owned a cat he'd named Belinda Carlisle and let drink from the black bidets. It was a long-haired sable Burmese. Ted loved Belinda Carlisle, but he knew enough not to let her get too close. The cat looked clean until you touched her. After that, you'd both be covered in grease dander. To deal with Belinda's shedding, Ted had one of those robot vacuum cleaners that scoured the floors all day. At least that was the idea. More than once, the two had joined forces. The cat had diarrhea, and the robot scooted through it, crossing and crisscrossing the puddle all day, smearing the mess until it spread to every square inch of the black carpet. When they'd been married almost a year, Rachel had announced that they needed to move. She was pregnant and didn't want to bring a newborn into this world of filthy rugs and open flames. They'd have to sell the house and give up Belinda Carlisle. Even Ted had to admit the place stunk like a cat box. No matter how often they changed the litter, and you couldn't be pregnant around a cat box. Over dinner, she explained toxoplasmosis. It was caused by the protozoan parasite Toxoplasma gondii and lived in the intestines of cats. It spread by laying its egg in cat feces and could kill or blind infants. She was used to explaining the issues to Ted. She knew he'd never been brilliant. That was his chief charm. He was loyal and even-tempered, and Ted was a hard worker if you stayed on top of him every second and told him exactly what to do. She'd married him for all the reasons she might hire a long-term employee. She had spoken slowly between bites of spaghetti. The only way to mask the smell of cat was to add cilantro to everything. After her speech, Ted sat across the table, the shadows from the glass blocks making a contour map of his face and white shirt. She could hear the bubbles in his mineral water. It didn't matter what Ted cooked. Nothing looked appetizing against his black glazed china. He blinked. He asked, "What are you saying?" Slower this time. Rachel had said, "We have to find a new house." "No," said Ted, drawing out the word as if playing for time. "Before that." Rachel wasn't annoyed. She'd rehearsed this for days. She could have paced it better. It was a lot to spring on him all at once. "I said we need to list the house." Ted closed his eyes and shook his head. His brow furrowed and he prompted, "Before that." The part about Belinda Carlisle? Before that. It worried Rachel to think that Ted wasn't stupid, that instead he just never listened to anything she said. She rewound their conversation in her mind. "Do you mean the part about being pregnant?" "You're pregnant?" Ted asked. He'd put his black napkin to his lips. To wipe them or hide them, Rachel couldn't tell. It's still Monday night in Orlando. Rachel's still waiting on the phone. She peels the bedspread down and stretches out to watch the Home Shopping channel. What she loves most about HSC is that it doesn't have commercials. Diamond cocktail rings rotate in slow motion, glittering under halogen lights and magnified to 100 times their actual size. The pitchman always speaks with a down-home drawl and always sounds so excited when he says, "You better hurry and order, folks. We don't got more than a couple thousand of these ruby tiaras left." Emerald solitaires sell for the same price as a jar of cashews from the minibar. With the TV on mute over the phone, she can hear the neighbor's dog barking. The barking disappears as if muffled by something, as if April put the receiver to her ear. Holding her breath to hear better, Rachel says, "Sweetheart? Boo-boo? How are you and Daddy getting along without Mommy?" She talks until she feels like an idiot babbling to herself in an empty motel room. She wonders what she's botched this time. Did she forget to kiss goodbye? The silence. Rachel suspects it's retribution. The night before her flight, she'd noticed her teeth were yellowed. Too much coffee would do that. After dinner, she prepared the bleaching trays and let April examine them. Rachel had explained how tightly they fit. Mommy couldn't answer any questions for at least an hour once the trays were on her teeth. Mommy couldn't talk at all. If April needed something, she'd need to ask her father. No sooner than she'd squirted the expensive bleaching gel into each tray and snapped it into her mouth, but April's hand was already tugging at her bathrobe, wanting a bedtime story. Ted wasn't any help. April went to bed in tears. Rachel's teeth still looked like hell. From the sounds that come through the wall, the guests in the next room are full-fledged screwing. Rachel cups one hand around the receiver and hopes her daughter won't overhear. She worries that the line has been disconnected and keeps asking, "April, sweetheart, can you hear Mommy?" Resigned, Rachel asks the girl to hand the telephone back to her father. Ted's voice comes on. Don't stew about it, he says. She's just giving you the silent treatment. His voice muffled, his mouth pointed somewhere else. He says, you're just upset that Mommy's gone, aren't you? A measure of dead air follows. Rachel can hear the carnival music and silly voices of cartoons playing in the living room. It's not lost on her that she mostly listens to television with no sound while her daughter watches without visuals. Still directed elsewhere, Ted's voice. You still love Mommy, don't you? Another beat of silence follows. Rachel hears nothing until Ted begins to placate. No, Mommy doesn't love her job more than she loves you. He doesn't sound very convincing. After a pause, he scolds, Don't say that, Missy. Never say that. From the tone of his voice, Rachel braces herself for the sound of a slap. She wants to hear a slap. It doesn't come. Clear, speaking directly into the receiver, Ted says, What can I say? Our kid can really hold a grudge. Rachel's thrilled. The last thing she wants her daughter to be is a sop like Ted, but she keeps those words in her mouth. That's Monday's phone call. Done. Belinda Carlisle had been Ted's cat since she was a kitten. She was an old cat when they'd listed her on various websites for adoption. Old and gassy. Only medical researchers might bother. When euthanasia had loomed as their best option, Ted called Rachel into the kitchen and showed her the cat's 50-pound bag of kibble. It was still over half full. He said, Just give me this long to find her a new family. To Rachel, this had seemed like a good compromise. Every day meant 2 scoops out of the kibble. The bag became an hourglass, counting down their final days with Belinda. After 2 weeks, Rachel was no longer so sure. The food bag was still half full. In fact, it seemed a little heavier than it had been when she'd first made the bargain. She suspected Ted was smuggling kibble from another source. Perhaps he kept a secret bag stashed in his car or somewhere in the garage, and he was using scoops of that to replenish the kitchen bag. To test her theory, she began to dole out double helpings for the cat's meals. Rachel told herself she was giving the cat a treat, indulging it instead of hurrying it towards its grave. The increased rations had barely fit in the cat's bowl, but Belinda ate it all. She was getting fat, but she wasn't getting any closer to being gone. Like the parable of the loaves and fishes or that lamp in the temple of David, the big bag of kibble was always half full. Today's call from Orlando doesn't go any better. Each night, she and Ted make small accountings to one another. He's raked the first fall of leaves. She's implemented the initial on-site catalyst for satellite microwave transmission. He's found a grocery that carries the cheese she likes so much. Rachel reports that she's resequenced the protocol script for the pre-systems charge. She says Orlando is a terrible place to find oneself without children. When she stops speaking, there's a stretch of silence, as if Ted's paying attention to something else. She listens for the sound of him keyboarding, doing emails while she talks. Finally, Ted speaks. He says, What's going on there? He means the sounds. The guests in the next room are screwing again. Actually, they've never stopped, and their constant moaning and shrill cries have disappeared into Rachel's ears. The sounds have droned on so long they must be a film. No one was ever that much in love. It makes her furious to imagine Ted has been listening to strangers humping instead of the progress that she's made. While a sapphire hovers on television, Ted's voice says, Take the phone, April. Tell Mommy good night. To hear more, Rachel tries to subtract the sound of the freeway outside. She tunes out the hum of the mini bar and the endearments grunted from beyond the wall. She hasn't taken a drink since some Christmas eggnog 3 years before, but now Rachel goes to the mini bar and surveys the rack of little glass bottles, each price higher than the diamond pendant on the television. A dwindling countdown shows there are fewer than 5,000 of these pendants left. For the price of pearl earrings, Rachel mixes herself a gin and tonic and chugs it down. Over the phone, Rachel hears Ted's voice. Muffled in the background, he whines, begging, "Tell Mommy about the turtles you liked at the zoo." Nothing follows. Rachel feels a respect for her daughter that she's never felt for her husband. For dinner, she tears open a mini bar bag of plain M&Ms that costs more than the shopping channel engagement set. For every bag of potato chips or candy bar she eats, another will appear to replace it as if by magic. Regarding the bag of cat food, Rachel had confronted Ted, but he denied any cheating. Rachel didn't cop to overfeeding, but she didn't point out that 5 weeks had gone by and Belinda Carlisle looked like a watermelon wearing a fur coat. Anymore, Rachel wasn't feeling much of a skinny mini either. "Are you saying," she'd asked, pointing to the food bag, "that this is a miracle?" It didn't help that the realtor who'd listed the house told them the living room smelled bad. The realtor said their asking price was $200,000 too high for the current market. Rachel's hormones didn't help either. Ted and Rachel had argued. Between Thanksgiving and Christmas, they bickered almost every day. During that time, the level of the food bag rose until kibble was spilling out onto the kitchen floor. The cat was so bloated she could hardly drag herself around the living room carpet. That's when their overpriced house had caught fire. On Wednesday evening, as usual, Rachel calls from Orlando. She half hopes April won't speak. That might prove that the girls inherited some of Rachel's own gumption. As a test, Rachel asks, "Don't you love Mommy?" Under her breath, she prays the girl won't take such obvious bait. The world is a horrible place. The last thing Rachel wants to create is a kid who bruises like a ripe banana. As if April needs further testing, Rachel says, "Let Mommy sing you a bedtime song." And she begins to croon a lullaby that knows will melt her daughter's resolve. Backing her up are the moans and groans from the next door, the sound without language, and the weak people make against their will. Rachel intends to sing all the verses, but she loses her nerve when she hears Ted's laugh. It sounds too clear. She guesses April has set down the receiver and walked away. That means Rachel has been singing to an empty kitchen. She ends by warning, "If you don't say goodnight, you'll make Mommy cry." If no one is listening, it doesn't matter what she says. She pretends to cry. She escalates her pretend sobs to wailing. It's easier than she imagined, and when she finds she can't stop, Rachel hangs up. Rachel hadn't invented the dangers of toxoplasmosis. She'd gone online and built an airtight case. This wasn't crazy talk. Neurobiologists had linked T. gondii to suicide and the onset of schizophrenia, all caused by exposure to cat poop. Some studies even suggested that the toxobrain parasites chemically coerced people to adopt more cats. Those crazy cat ladies were actually being controlled by an infection of single-cell invaders. The problem with educating stupid people was that they didn't know they were stupid. The same went for curing crazy cat people. As far as the cat was concerned, Ted was both. On the last night in their first house, as Rachel had later explained to the police, they'd gone to a Christmas party in the neighborhood. The two of them were coming home. They'd been drinking eggnog, and as they trudged through the snow, she explained to Ted that he didn't need to be such a softie. She spoke carefully, waiting for her words to stick. The footprints she'd left were splayed wide apart to balance her new weight. Rachel was still working as a level 1 corporate interface consultant, but simply entering her second trimester felt like a full-time job. She worried that with a new baby, the situation wouldn't get much better. You might be able to divide a man's love in half, but not in 3 ways. The way Rachel told it to the police, she had walked into the darkened house first. She hadn't even taken off her coat. She'd said, "It's freezing in here." The Christmas tree filled the living room's front window, blocking any street light. In fact, Everyone's first assumption was that the Christmas tree was the culprit. The usual suspects were always scented candles, faulty twinkle lights, an overloaded outlet. Ted pegged the roving robotic vacuum cleaner. His fingers were crossed that it had overheated. Some circuit had shorted out and it had raced around filled with flammable cat hair and set fire to everything. Thursday night in Orlando. It's the age-old paradox. The more Rachel tries to hurry the installation process, the longer things take. She phones herself and leaves messages. Memo to self. Finalize nomenclature for graphics inventory. She takes her phone off the bedside table and begins to scroll through her photos. She has only one of April. Somehow it seems wrong to photograph a blind person. It's like stealing something valuable they don't even know that they own. In the same spirit, Rachel self-edits to never say, "What a lovely sunset," or "Eyes this way, honey." Around April, to exclaim, "What a beautiful flower," would seem like taunting. She and Ted had met on a blind date, another phrase Rachel vigorously avoids. Recently, her daughter had begun to call out, "Look at me, Mom, look at me, are you watching?" April obviously had no idea what she was saying. That was simply the universal chorus of children, sighted or blind. The essence of being a parent was the shift from being the person who is watched to being the person who does the watching. Again, Thursday, the girl refuses to utter a sound. Rachel scrutinizes with her ears. Rachel wheedles and promises until Ted takes the phone and says, "Sorry." She can hear the helpless shrug in his voice, and he says, "I can't make her talk." To that, Rachel says, "Try." Ted has a real talent for giving up. She suggests he poke April in the ribs to make her laugh. She asks, "Isn't she ticklish?" In response, Ted laughs, but mostly from disbelief. "You're asking if she's ticklish?" He snorts, "Where have you been the past 3 years?" Following the night of the fire, all that Rachel would ever accept the blame was for throwing the switch. Before turning on the living room lights, Rachel had said that she'd gone to the thermostat and dialed up the heat. She'd switched on the gas fireplace at the same moment the screams had started. A wild banshee wail filled the dark rooms, like some wintry demon, an unearthly screeching sound, and then the entire household seemed to catch fire. The Christmas tree flared, the black throw pillows flared, the black area rugs blazed. Ted rushed to embrace Rachel even as the bedspreads and bath towels burst into raging orange flame. Through all of this echoed screams of souls tortured in hell. The air stank with smoke and scorched hair. The smoke detectors added to the head-splitting racket. They didn't have time to back their black car down the driveway and save it before flames were flapping like bright flags from every upstairs window. They were standing on the snowy front lawn when the fire trucks came sirening out of nowhere. The house was fully involved. In Orlando, Rachel has begun to speculate. It would be exactly like Ted to keep some awful truth from her, at least until she gets home. If April were in the hospital, if she'd been stung by a bee and had a severe reaction or worse, Ted would think he was doing Rachel a kindness by not telling her over the phone. She goes online and searches for accidents in Seattle involving 3-year-old girls in the past week. To her dismay, she finds one. According to the new item, a girl has been attacked by a neighbor's dog. Currently, she was in the hospital in critical condition. Her name was being withheld pending notification of the victim's extended family. That night, Rachel listens to her new messages. They are all from herself. Memo to self, repercussions. Just that one word, shrill and bullying. She has no idea to what she'd been referring to at the time. She had to check the caller ID to even recognize it was herself. Was that how her voice really sounds? All night, the idea weighs on her. How many toddlers choke to death on rubber balls and never make the CNN scroll? She keeps hitting refresh, hoping for updates on the Seattle Times story. What kind of mother is she if she can't sense whether her child is dead or alive? The fire marshal hadn't thought it was arson, not at first. The episode had made them celebrities, and not in a good way. They'd become living proof of something people didn't want to believe could really happen. The fire marshal had picked through the charred rooms, charting the path of the blaze's ignition. It had started at the minimalist fireplace and traced a circle around the perimeter of the living room. Next, the perimeter of the dining room had kindled. He had sketched a rough floor plan on a sheet of graph paper clipped to a clipboard. Using a mechanical pencil, he drew a line from the dining room up the stairs around the perimeter of the master bedroom and bathroom. Tucked under his arm, he was carrying something wrapped in a black plastic garbage bag. "Damnedest thing I'd ever seen," he told Ted and Rachel in the driveway. He'd held the bag open and let them peer inside. It smelled horrific, a combination of burnt hair and chemicals. Ted took one look and began to shake. Friday night in Orlando. Rachel briefly entertains the idea of calling the police, but what could she say? She checks for an update about the 3-year-old girl in critical condition. She calls a neighbor back home, Joanne. They'd had a passing acquaintance based on a mutual hatred of the local garbage collectors. Joanne picks up on the 19th ring. Rachel asks if Ted has gotten their garbage can out to the curb that week. She doesn't want to tip her hand. She listens, switching the phone from one ear to the other, but hears nothing. Most of what she doesn't hear is Joanne's Rottweiler mix barking. It's always barking and clawing at their fence. At last, Joanne says, "Garbage pickup is next week, Rachel." She sounds guarded. She says Rachel's name as if she's signaling to other people within earshot. She asks how Orlando is, and Rachel racks her brain trying to remember if she'd mentioned the trip beforehand. Testing, Rachel says, "I hope Ted's not spoiling April while I'm gone." The pause that follows lasts too long. "April? My daughter?" Joanne says, "I know who April is." Now she sounds irritated. Rachel can't help herself. "Did Caesar bite my baby?" The line goes dead. At least the fire marshal had solved the mystery of why their house stank every winter. Belinda Carlisle, the marshal conjectured, had been using the crushed granite of the fireplace as a litter box. Anytime they'd switched on gas jets, Ted and Rachel had been parboiling untold amounts of buried cat waste. The insurance adjuster told them that what had occurred was without precedent. Rachel noticed how he could hardly contain his laughter as he explained how the cat must have been voiding her bowels at the same time Rachel flipped the fireplace switch. One moment, Belinda was taking a secret late-night crap in the dark little cave of the firebox. In the cold house, maybe she savored the gentle warmth of the pilot light. He would have heard the cricket click, click, click of the electronic spark igniter. Instantly, jets of blue flame would have shot at her from every direction. It had been this fury, flaming demon that had exploded, screaming, and raced around the house, setting fire to every cloth item before falling dead in an upstairs closet beneath Rachel's dry cleaning stored flammable plastic. Sunday, Rachel phones home 3 times and gets the voicemail. She pictures the house empty. It's too easy to picture Ted weeping beside the hospital bed. When he finally picks up, she asks for April. "If that's how you want it, young lady," she threatens, "no Christmas, no merry-go-round, no pizza, unless you speak up." She waits, not wanting to be hurtful. She blames her mood on the rum and cola, a double, that costs more than a turquoise belt buckle from TV. "I had a little girl who was blind," she taunts, trying to provoke a response. "What are you now, Helen Keller?" It's the rum talking. On television, an enlarged topaz sparkles hypnotically, rotating slowly with the sound turned down. In the depths of the quiet, Rachel can hear breathing. It's not her imagination. April is breathing. Sounding stubborn, huffing angry little snorts as her chubby arms are crossed over her chest and her cherub cheeks are flushed red with anger. Taking a gamble, Rachel asks, "What do you want Mommy to bring you when she comes home?" The bribe helped everyone save face. A Mickey Mouse, she offers, or a Donald Duck? She hears a faint gasp. The breathing stops for an instant before the distant high-pitched voice squeals, "Oh, Daddy." Delighted, it says, "Pull my hair, Daddy." And then some really bad, nasty words I can't say. It's not April. It's the guest next door, a voice filtering through the wall. "How about we use a solid gold, 1,000-pound bar of chocolate-covered Rocky Road ice cream?" Rachel deadpans, shouting away from the receiver. She pounds a fist against the wall and yells, "How about a pretty pony F's you?" Over the phone, she hears the little robot vacuum humming around, a replacement, cleaning the floor and bumping into walls like what else? A sightless animal? Ted sits on his ass half the day, but he still wants his labor-saving, sharper image gadgets. It scares Rachel, the idea that April might accidentally stumble over the vacuum, but Ted insists she's smarter than a cheap machine. In a flash, Rachel knows. Even if she's a little tipsy, it all makes sense. Ted blames her for what happened in Belinda Carlisle. He's not brilliant, but he's not stupid. Holding a grudge is something April inherited from her father. He's bided his time, and now he's getting his revenge. A thin crack opens up in her voice, and now all of her panic rushes to escape. She asks, "April, baby, is your dad hurting you?" She tries not to ask, to stop, but the effort is like trying to unpop a balloon. By the time April had been born, they were settled in a cookie-cutter ranch house a few blocks away. Ted had wanted to bury the cat in the new backyard, but the fire marshal never surrendered the remains. The ranch house was less dramatic. It had no open fireplace, no bidet, but with a blind child that was just as well. How could Rachel not be affected? Living pregnant for 6 months with smoldering cat turds? As the obstetrical put in, the too toxic parasite attacks the optic nerve, but Rachel knew there was more to it than that. It was retribution. Of course, Rachel swore she hadn't seen Belinda Carlisle before she'd flipped the switch, and Ted accepted Rachel's statement at face value. There were lies that married people more effectively than any wedding vows. On Sunday, Rachel phones and insists Ted listen. "The next call I make is to the police," she swears. "Unless April says something to change her mind, she's going to call Child Protective Services and request an intervention." Her husband, Mr. Passive Aggressive, laughs, a confused laugh. "What do you want me to do, pinch her?" "Pinch her, yes," Rachel says. "Spank her, pull her hair, anything." He asks, "Just to clarify, if I don't smack my kid, you'll report me for child abuse?" Nodding, Rachel tells the phone yes. She pictures him drinking coffee out of the black glazed mug he'd salvaged from the fire's wreck. The color and finish are so ugly, the mug looks as good as new. "How about I burn her with a cigarette? Would that make you happy?" "Use the needle from my sewing box, but sterilize it with some rubbing alcohol first. She's never had a tetanus shot." Ted says, "I can't believe that you're serious. This has gone on long enough," she says. She knows she sounds crazy. Maybe it's too late. Maybe this was the toxoplasmosis, an infection in her brain talking. But she knows she's serious. When their insurance settlement for the fire had failed to come through in a speedy fashion, by then the fire marshal was calling it arson. The lab tests had found a residue in the cat's fur, some incendiary chemical agent that kept Belinda Carlisle aflame during her panicked, agonizing final flight. It looked fishier yet that a few weeks before the fire, Rachel had doubled their homeowner's coverage. Even with a baby clamped to one breast, she hadn't hesitated to lawyer up. On the phone Sunday night, Rachel says she's not bluffing. Either Ted makes their daughter emit some words, some sound, or they'll have this battle in family court. It seems like a long time, but Ted responds. His voice pointed elsewhere. He says, "April, honey, do you remember what a flu shot is?" He says, "Do you remember when you had to get a shot so you could go play at Easter camp?" Silence answers. Rachel shuts her eyes in order to hear more. All she can detect is the hum of the fluorescent bulb in the bedside lamp. She stands from the bed to shut off the air conditioner, but she takes a step, Ted's voice back. Can you get Daddy the sewing basket? Nothing seems to happen. But now his voice comes full into Rachel's ear. Are you happy? Does this make you happy? His footsteps sound in the hallway. I'm going to the bathroom. His delivery is sing-song like a lullaby. I'm getting the rubbing alcohol to torture our daughter. He sings. Rach, you can stop this at any time. But Rachel knows this isn't true. Nobody can stop anything. The people will always be humping next door. The burning cow will always be rocketing like a comet around every house in which they'll ever live. Nothing will ever be resolved. Again, it crosses her mind that Ted might be tormenting her. April is upstairs in her room or playing in the backyard, or he's only pretending she's there. That's easier to swallow than the idea that her own child despises her. You don't understand, Rachel tells the phone. I need you to hurt her to prove she's alive, she demands. Hurt her as proof of how much you don't hate me. Before the TV can sell another 1,000 diamond wristwatches, April screams. Not a beat later, Ted asks, Rach? Breathless, the scream echoing in her head. It would echo in her head forever. The shriek of Belinda Carlisle. It's the same squeal April had made when she was born. You did it, Ted replies. You screamed. It wasn't Rachel's scream or April's. It was still another sex noise from the next room. It's another stalemate. The bag will always be half full. Ted will always be cheating. Rachel asks him to put April on the phone. Make sure she's got the phone to her ear, and then I want you to leave the room. Your father doesn't understand. Into the phone, Rachel says. He owed more on that house than it was worth. Someone had to make the ugly choices. She explains to her daughter how the only problem with marrying a spineless, lazy, stupid man is that you could be stuck with him for the rest of your life. I had to do something, Rachel says. I didn't want you to be born dead and blind. It doesn't matter who's listening, Ted or April. It's another mess that Rachel needs to clean up. She describes how she'd combed her hairspray into the cat's fur. Simple, cheap hairspray. Every day for weeks. She knew it was using the fireplace as a toilet, and she hoped the pilot light would be enough. Rachel overfed it so the cat would need to defecate more often. She crossed her fingers that an increase in intestinal gas might do the trick. She was no sadist. On the contrary, she didn't want Belinda Carlisle to suffer. Rachel had made certain that the smoke detectors had fresh batteries, and she waited. Your father, she begins. He thinks that if the dishes in the toilet are black to begin with, that they'll never get dirty. Their last night in Ted's house, Rachel had stepped into the living room. She'd rushed inside from the cold. She'd intentionally turned down the thermostat, hoping to make the pilot light more attractive. To set her trap, she buried tuna fish in the crushed gravel. That night, she'd walked in the dark room into the shadow cast by the Christmas tree and seen two yellow eyes blinking at her from the fireplace. A little drunk, she said, I'm sorry. On the phone in Orlando, very drunk, she says, I wasn't sorry. Rachel had told the cat goodbye, and she'd flipped a switch. The click, click, click of the tapping of the white cane. The banshee scream. Flames raced up the living room curtains. Flames raced up the stairs. Eventually, the insurance company couldn't prove definitely that any chemical residue wasn't the scorched remains of dry cleaning plastic. Saying this, she senses that April has become a stranger, someone separate who must be respected and deserves to know the truth. April has split away to become another person. Your daddy's stalling is the reason why you'll never see a sunset. The silence could have been anyone or no one. If it's April, she won't understand until she's older. Rachel says, I only chose your father because he's weak. I married him because I knew I could push him around. She says that the problem with passive people is that they force you to take action. After that, they hate you for it. They never forgive you. Only then, over the phone, clear and unmistakable, does Rachel hear Ted begin to weep. It's nothing she hasn't heard before, but this time his sob builds until, like blasts from a whistle, a child screams. like a smoke alarm. A high-pitched, frantic child's shriek erupts, sirening from the telephone. Rachel's goading has worked. He'd bullied her, coerced, controlled, and steered her into hurting something innocent. Now they were even. With her child's screams and her husband's weeping still loud in her ears, Rachel gazes at a gigantic revolving diamond entrance, trying to divine the new future as she whispers, "Good night." And that's the most awful story. So, if you made it to the end, I just want to chat really quick and tell you, like, that story ruined me because I just imagine this poor little baby girl. She's blind. She doesn't understand anything. And she's listening to her dad freak out. And I mean, that was tough. So if you made it to the end, I hope that you were able to fall asleep, relax. And if you didn't, I just hope that you enjoyed the story. So I'll see you in the next one.